So why read a book on fundamentalists in the public square? For me, it's because I don't know where I fall under the fundamentalist and evangelical labels. Part of me feels like a passionate fundamentalist. I went to Bob Jones University. I believe in a young earth, and I stand in confidence with all the miracles of the Bible. I am just beating that drum that the Word of God is to be our guideline for what is truth, which is what makes me think if anybody's a fundamentalist, it should be this guy right here. But going to Bob Jones, I know that there is a legalism in fundamentalism that I detest. And Madison Trammel shows in this book how prohibition was a major foundational viewpoint of fundamentalists, and I'm not somebody who is going to be campaigning for politicians to bring back prohibition. Even when it comes then to being an evangelical. While I liked a lot of what Madison Trammel writes about evangelicalism in the introduction of this book when he's contrasting evangelicals and fundamentalists, at the same time, I feel like the label evangelicalism is used so broad and so often in political context that I feel like when it comes for Christians, evangelicalism can seem kind of useless at times. I don't know if any of these labels really work for me. And so I was hoping that Madison Trammel's book on fundamentalists during the interwar period, the interwar period is the years between World War I and World War II, or from 1918 to 1939, that maybe this book just might give me a little bit of clarity. Sadly, it did not. Not because of any shortcomings with the book, but because I felt more like a fundamentalist and less like a fundamentalist by reading Trammel's book, because at times, labels can just be the worst. But this was a very enlightening journey into the label fundamentalist and the role they played in shaping 20th century America. It was a bigger role than a lot of people probably give them credit for, so allow me a few minutes to tell you some more about what I learned from Fundamentalists in the Public Square by Madison Trammel. Welcome to Rev Reads. If you want to discover more books that will help you to discover the history of the American Church, please subscribe to the channel so that you can stay up to date with the most current reviews. And also, please like and share this video with others to help them know about the work of Madison Trammel. Now, I want you to say first, Madison Trammel's book, Fundamentalists in the Public Square, this book should receive high marks across the board. Why? I think he covered all his bases. He checked off every goal. And while this book probably won't receive a wide audience, I think those who are interested in this topic and pick up this book will find that this book will give them exactly what they were hoping to find in a book on fundamentalism in the mid-20th century. Trammel's book looks to answer a very simple question. Did the Scopes monkey trial of 1925 bring about a massive loss to fundamentalism and cause the movement to retreat? His book uses newspaper articles from before and after the trial in order to answer that question. And along the way, he had me contemplating, what is fundamentalism? And does being a dispensationalist also automatically make me a fundamentalist? And after going through this book, I found his newspaper article tactic to, one, be excellent. At first, when I got this book in the mail and then I realized what it was going to be, I was bummed that I was basically going to be walking through old newspaper clippings in the book. I actually spent a couple days considering, do I put this in an envelope and mail this back to Lexham Academic and tell them, thanks, but no thanks, I'm not going to read it after all? Well, I plowed through anyways. And it turned out that the newspaper articles ended up being more interesting and more enlightening than I expected them to be. The enlightening part came from the very clear picture that, no, the Scopes monkey trial did not end fundamentalism as a religious and political movement in America. The fundamentalists continued to both share the gospel and seek to influence creationism in the public schools and fight for prohibition. It also seems clear that the trial spurred more involvement by fundamentalists. Now, were they successful in what they did? No, because most Americans today believe in evolution, and I don't think Americans will ever outlaw alcohol again. But it wasn't because of a lack of effort and meetings and campaigns by fundamentalists. Now, my theory, I could be wrong, but my theory is that evangelicalism and the pro life movement moved into that space that was once occupied by fundamentalists, and that probably happened in the 1970s. And that was a bigger cause for a lack of political involvement by fundamentalists today. Now, there were many interesting things to learn in this book along the way, such as of those two issues, young earth creationism and prohibition, they were so important that at times, in my view, it seems like they were overshadowing the doctrinal concerns of fundamentalists. Now, maybe this is because Trammel was taking sort of a slanted view. He's looking at newspaper coverage. But at the same time, I couldn't imagine anyone in the mid-20th century being able to carry the label fundamentalist and also at the same time believe that prohibition was a bad political move. Another interesting point was seeing how many Democrats were the party of choice of fundamentalists at that time. William Jennings Bryan himself was a Democrat. And one of the reasons that women's suffrage passed was because fundamentalists wanted women to vote, because they knew that those women who were voting would help them outlaw alcohol. And then speaking of William Jennings Bryan, it was kind of eye-opening to see just how popular he was during that time period. But when it comes to Trammel's main purpose for the book, I think the overwhelming answer is fundamentalism did not die in 1925 with the Scopes monkey trial, even if some people want to tell that tale. The other interesting part of the book was Trammel's coverage of dispensationalism and how he examined if dispensationalism moved or forced fundamentalism into a direction of not engaging with culture. So in other words, one of the reasons that fundamentalists moved away from political goals was not because they lost in public opinion at the Scopes trial, but it was because a lot of them were dispensationalists. Now, first, I want to applaud Trammel for giving one of the most balanced and fair overviews of dispensationalism that I've read in a while from someone who, I'm going to guess Madison Trammel was not a dispensationalist. There were only a couple of sentences in his overview that I didn't care for. One was when he wrote on Schaeffer's view of the church. The most significant characteristic of the church was that it was not Israel. I found that summary to be uncharitable, to say the least. But overall, I found myself agreeing with him again and again on the views of early dispensationalists such as Schaeffer and Schofield. And I think his conclusion was correct, that dispensationalism does and does not lend itself toward cultural engagement by the church. It does lend itself toward cultural engagement because dispensationalists want to see people get saved. We want to see people believe in Jesus Christ. We want to see lives changed for godliness and sanctification. So there is a desire among dispensationalists to see the truth of God proclaimed instead of the lies of the adversary. And so this leads dispensationalists to share the gospel and to call out for people, especially Christians, to speak the truth. But dispensationalism can also work against us. Because, as Trammel writes, Christians had no earthly goals at all, strictly speaking, in the framework of dispensationalism, as heaven was the future home of believers. Now, I believe the new earth is the future home for believers and not heaven, but Trammel is right in the fact that our ultimate goals as dispensationalists are not political change, better governments, or raising the standard of living, but our goal is we want to see the return of Jesus, and we want Jesus to establish the kingdom of our dreams and not to bring about his kingdom through political aims, because we're not going to be successful at that. So while dispensationalism does call on us to reach the lost, to see lives changed through sanctification, it also keeps our political aspirations focused on Jesus' coming and his return, and not what we can accomplish in the political realm right now, which I honestly think is a right and healthy balance, even though a lot of Christians will not agree with dispensationalists at all because of this. So I have more mixed feelings right now than I did going into this book about the title Fundamentalist, because I think now my thoughts are even more informed by the history of the movement, and when you really get into the history of things, things get more messy at times. But if you have any interest in reading about fundamentalism and dispensationalism in the mid 20th century, this is a very interesting journey to take from a fresh perspective.